Presenting Battles in 15 Minutes. Pearl Harbor. Japan is on the march, further expanding its empire into China. Emboldened by its alliance with Nazi Germany, the island nation has taken French Indonesia and is threatening Britain's Pacific colonies. The United States, through oil embargoes, hopes to halt Japan's advance. As U.S.-Japanese relations worsen, Japan sends special envoys to Washington. While the diplomats meet, Japan prepares for war. In November 1941, a strike force secretly goes to sea. Its target, Pearl Harbor, on the Sunday morning of December 7th.
USS Condor, 0342 hours. The U.S. minesweeper Condor is on patrol less than 2 miles off the entrance to Pearl Harbor. The officer of the deck sees something about 50 yards ahead of the port bow. He asks a sailor what he makes of the object. "That's a periscope, sir," the sailor replies, "and there aren't supposed to be any subs in the area." The Condor sends a blinker light message to the destroyer ward. Sighted submerged submarine on westerly course. Speed 9 knots.
Japanese carriers, 0610 hours. Already in flight, Commander Mitsuo Fushida, who will lead the Japanese air attack on Pearl Harbor, sees the Japanese aircraft carriers rocking on a choppy sea. As the carriers pitch and roll, waves crash across the flight decks. Crewmen cling to the aircraft to keep them from going over the side. The carriers churn into the wind, and the first wave of planes, 183 fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes, roar into the sky. Pilots reconfirm their navigation by using a Honolulu radio station's music as a guiding beam.
Opana Radar Station, 0702 hours. The Army's Opana Mobile Radar Station is one of the 6 radar stations in Oahu. Radar is a new defense tool in Hawaii. The system has been in operation for less than a month. One of the 2 privates on duty looks at the radar oscilloscope and can't believe his eyes. He asks his buddy to take a look, and he confirms the sighting. 50 or more aircraft on bearing for Oahu. The privates call for the Fort Shafter Information Center, the hub of the radar network.
USS Ward, 0653 hours. From the Ward to the 14th Naval Headquarters at Pearl Harbor Naval Station, we have dropped depth charges upon sub operating in defensive sea area. Then almost immediately, a second, more detailed message. We have attacked, first upon, and dropped depth charges upon submarine operating in defensive sea area. The Ward's captain believes that the message will show superiors that the destroyer had not just responded to a submarine sighting, but actually shot at something.
Telegraph Office, 0733 hours. From a decoded Japanese message, President Roosevelt and General George Marshall learned that Japanese negotiators in Washington have been told to break off talks. Believing that this may mean war, Marshall sends out a warning to Lieutenant General Walter Short, commander of U.S. Army forces in Hawaii. Atmospheric static blacks out the communications with Hawaii, so Marshall's message goes out via commercial telegraph. It will reach Short's headquarters in 1145 hours. SIN-CPAC headquarters, 0715 hours. The Ward had sent out its message that it had attacked an unidentified sub in code. At headquarters, code clerks decode the message, then routinely put it in paraphrase so there will not be an exact paper copy that might aid an enemy codebreaker. The message gradually makes its way to the top. Admiral Husband E. Kimmel, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. Because there had been so many false reports of submarines recently, Kimmel decides to wait for verification of the report. Fort Shafter, 0720 hours. An Army lieutenant who is training at the Radio Network Operations Centers at Fort Shafter gets the Opana Radar Station report, the biggest sightings the radar operator had ever seen. By now the planes are about 70 miles away. The lieutenant believes that the radar had picked up a flight of US B-17 Flying Fortress bombers headed from California to Hawaii. For security reasons, he cannot tell this to the radar operations. All he says is, "Well, don't worry about it."
As the first attack wave of the Japanese fighters takes off from their aircraft carriers at 0740 hours, it includes 49 high-altitude bombers, 51 dive bombers, 40 torpedo planes, and 43 fighters. They fly through the clouds, wondering if Pearl Harbor will be visible. Then as they near Oahu, the attack commander hears the Honolulu weather report, clouds mostly over the mountains, visibly good. The clouds break, the flyers see a long white line of coast, Oahu's Kaiku Point. At 07:49 hours, Japan orders their first attack on Pearl Harbor. When the Japanese hit, they took away 169 American planes and damaged 159. They also nailed 8 Pacific Fleet battleships that were sunk or badly damaged. Here are some eyewitness accounts of what happened when the planes hit Pearl Harbor.
I was hopping mad. I wanted to shoot every damn plane out of the sky. The smoke was so thick in places you could almost walk on it. All the planes were burning, and then this plane comes down and disappears into the smoke. I said to myself, when he gets out of that smoke, I'm gonna let him have it. I swung my gun around to the center of that smoke, and that guy came barreling out of it. I was shooting right down and hit the propeller hub. I got off maybe 8 rounds. I think he came to get me, but this plane slammed into a hillside.
Well, that particular day, I was chief of the watch, and I had the 12 to 4 watch, so I was up till 4 o'clock in the morning. I went to bed, and in the morning, this old friend, we went to church all the time. So he wanted me to go, and I said, "Oh, forget it, Fred, I haven't had any sleep." And I was just sitting there on my bed telling him no, no. The next thing you know, the place blew up. So many things were running through your mind. Every time you turn your head one way or the other, you're seeing something. Your mind got so boggled up with what you were seeing, and you were so busy yourself anyway. I was in my skeevies all day until that night.
I heard blasting, and they had been doing construction work at Ford Island, and I thought it was just dynamiting Ford Island at first. And one sailor came busting through our place, his eyes as big as saucers, and says, "The Japs are bombing Ford Island." And I thought he was a joker, and paid no attention to it. First soon another came running through, and about that time we heard them sounding air defense. We had one bomb hit. They dropped a string of bombs across our dry dock, got the 2 destroyers. They wrecked them, destroyed them almost completely, and one bomb hit us, a 500-pounder. And the overhead just of all a sudden would bounce up and down when the bomb hit, and dust flew out all the nooks and crannies.
USS Arizona, 0800 hours. An armor-piercing bomb dropped by a high-altitude bomber pierces the forward deck of the Arizona. All the sailors who abandoned ship could do was watch as it sunk to the bottom of the ocean.
I was out on deck, doing the morning chores, when all of a sudden, a plane came along. I didn't pay much attention to it, because planes were landing at Ford Island all the time. Then chips started flying all around me, and I realized the plane was strafing me. I could look up and see the meatball on the wings, and I could see the pilot. I ran into the ship and started back to my battle station. The bomb went off. I guess it knocked me out. I don't know how long I lay there. The water was knee-deep. A friend of mine was crying and asking me for help. I looked at him in horror. His skin was hanging off of him. There was nothing in the world I could do for him. He was dying.
The USS Helm, 0800 17 hours. Through the flames and smoke, the destroyer speeds from Pearl Harbor to the presumed safety of the open sea. As the helm leaves the channel, a lookout spots a Japanese sub snagged in a reef. The helm shoots, but misses. The 2-person sub breaks free and submerges, but it snags again. Trying to escape the floundering sub, one crewman drowns, the other is washed ashore, and becomes the United States' first World War II prisoner.
The Japanese second wave, 0854 hours. The second wave had 35 fighters, 78 dive bombers, 54 high-altitude bombers meet a heavy anti-aircraft fire from the Americans.
I was rearming at Wheeler. The second wave suddenly came up the valley. I turned on the grassy field and took off right into them. Then I got in the middle of their line. The P-40 was very good at dogfighting. We had absolutely no trouble at all finding plenty of targets. We caught up with them at Iwa, a Marine base. They were in the strafing lineup, and I merely got into the line.
All except for the destroyers Arizona, Utah, and the Oklahoma, every ship sunk or damaged on December 7th will sail again. Here is an eyewitness account of a sailor off of the Utah.
I had been aboard the Utah a little better than 2 years. That morning I saw a plane making a run and the torpedo headed for the Utah, and as it hit the ship we felt the draw, but the torpedoes did not explode. They went right in and through the hull of the ship and let water in, and the next command was abandon ship. She was turning over, and we just went over the side and entered the water and swam to Ford Island. And actually it took 8 minutes. In 8 minutes the ship was history. She had turned turtle in 8 minutes. Dory Miller was on the West Virginia, and when the West Virginia was hit, the captain and the executive officer, the XO, were on the bridge and they both were injured. So, Dory Miller went up and physically picked up the captain and brought him down to the first aid station. And then he went back and manned a .50 caliber machine gun, which he had not been trained on. And history and the citations say that he shot down 3 Japanese planes. This was a very courageous young man, and it was believed that he should have gotten the Congressional Medal of Honor. And the only reason why he didn't get the Congressional Medal of Honor was because he was black. Although he got the Navy Cross, but it was always believed that for what he did that day, he should have gotten the Congressional Medal of Honor.
We were in Battleship Row, and California was forward of us. Well, it was a beautiful morning before the attack. It was peaceful, nice and still. Our planes used to come in on Sunday morning, so we never thought a thing about planes coming in, because our planes used to do that. That's how quick it was. When they started coming in, I was standing on the forward part of the ship, and we stood there and watched it for a while before we realized what was happening. And I don't know how many people got killed on Ford Island before we ever knew what was going on, because they were dropping bombs on there and everything. The alarm didn't go off until after, but we noticed a rising sun on the planes. And there was a gunner in the back end of those planes, and he was firing at us. But as luck would have it, I was under the 16-inch guns, I don't know how I ever got to the turret without getting hit.
The U.S. Naval Hospital started piling up with all the wounded from the battle. Here is Mary Ann Ramsey, a teenage nurse at the time.
Our wounded arrived, some with filthy black oil covering shredded flesh. We placed them on mattresses and gave them cigarettes to those who wanted to smoke, even holding them for the ones who could not use their hands. We tried to reassure them. With the first sailor so horribly burned, personal fear left me. He brought me the full tragedy of that day.
The Japanese hit the U.S. hard with this. The U.S. had enough reason to go into war. Pearl Harbor brought the U.S. into war, the day that will live in infamy. Thank you for joining us for Battles in 15 Minutes.